This week we're going to be talking about evaluating and measuring financial performance. But how do you evaluate and measure the financial performance of an idea you haven't even tried yet? As a creative person, perhaps you have some projects you'd like to pursue in the future, or maybe you will find yourself working with creative folks who have creative projects that they'd like to pursue. Well, all of these ideas are essentially the same from the viewpoint of an investor. In other words, they have a cost associated with them up front, and then they have either one or a series of what we call cash flows from that project. Now, hopefully you can agree with me that logically it makes sense that the value of an idea slash business slash creative project today should be directly connected to how much we expect it to make. Now, not all ideas are worth the same amount to me today, right? We kind of know that from a gut level, but finance doesn't like gray area answers. In finance, we want to know exactly yes or no, should a project get a green light or not get a green light? In other words, an idea or business or project that is expected to generate more money than another project in the future should be worth more to me today, right? All ideas, businesses, projects are not worth the same amount. If the value of that today is directly connected to how much money we expect it to make in the future, then it is a valuable exercise for us to detail what we expect to pay for an investment or project or business, and then specifically state when we expect to receive cash flows and how much those cash flows are. In order to figure out how much an idea is worth today, when we haven't even tried it yet, we're really relying on our forecasting. We're forecasting the future cash flows, which is essentially what you did in assignment 1 when you helped to develop the financial statements for a small live venue. You were forecasting what we think, under reasonable assumptions, is going to happen in the future. So once you do the forecasting for your idea, your project, or your business, now we have the building blocks of what we need to figure out or determine how much that idea is worth today. But before we can do that, we have to understand a very basic and important concept that essentially runs all of Wall Street and global finance. And that is the concept that money has a time value. Did you know that money has a time value? Most people, when I say that, the first reaction they have is a gut reaction. Most of us think of the economic word inflation. When we hear somebody say that money has a time value, then surely we're talking about the fact that if you have money today, that in a year from now, the money might not be worth what it is today. That is absolutely true. However, for the purposes of this lesson, I want you to completely set aside inflation and ignore it altogether. Just pretend that there is no inflation in the world. Am I saying it doesn't happen? No, it absolutely is true. But this concept that money has a time value is true before we factor inflation into the equation. So how does this work? Well, let me ask you a question. If somebody came to you, perhaps a trusted relative or friend, and they said, I'd like to give you a crisp $100 bill, and I could either give it to you now, or I could give it to you in 5 years. The same exact $100 bill. What would you say to that? Well, most people their gut reaction is to say, "Well, I want it now," and so then I would like to know why you want it now. And probably most people would answer that question by saying, "Well, I want it now because I can spend it." About 2/3 of the spending that takes place in any given year is from the consumer. So most people are taking money and they're consuming it. But the highest use of money is to be like an investor and invest into a project or a business or an idea. And of course, profit and wealth flow into the hands of people that have the highest use for money. A friend or relative offered to generously give you a $100 bill, and they said that you could have it today or in 5 years. And you would say what? I'd rather have it today. Why would you say you'd rather have it today? Because you can take that money and invest it and grow it into a larger amount in the future. And that illustrates the fact that money has a time value. Where can you take that $100 bill and save/invest into something and take almost zero risk? Where's the safest place you can save/invest? Well, you can take that to the bank. If you take it to the bank, you could put it into a savings account. Why is it zero risk? Well, they're going to pay you some interest no matter what, and you might say, well, it's not zero risk because the bank could fail. Well, it is true that the bank could fail. Typically, a bank would fail because of a self-fulfilling prophecy. In other words, through the economic cycle, which is driven by psychology and the shift between fear and greed, let's say that the social mood has gone into a state of fear. People are afraid, and because they're afraid, they think their money's not safe and they want it from the bank. So they all decide that they want their money at the same time, which of course we know is not all there because they only reserve about 10% of it, and the other 90% is loaned out. So they call it a bank, but it's funny, most of the money is actually not there. If everybody was fearful and they came and they wanted their money at the same time, then of course they would actually cause the bank to fail because they can't produce all that money, and it would be a self-fulfilling prophecy, which is exactly what happened during the Great Depression. But they fixed it by creating something called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is otherwise known as FDIC, and that is essentially an insurance fund that is paid for by the profits of the bank every year, and that FDIC covers a certain amount of depositors' money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. In case the bank fails, you will not lose anything. So that's why I say it's basically virtually zero risk. It turns out that you have the power to take money and invest it at zero risk. Are you the only one that has this power? Absolutely not. I have the power to do that. Your neighbor has the power to do that. Everybody has the power to do this. Most people have the idea, but don't have enough money to finance the idea. And that is why we have the financial system, because it's a place where suppliers of money and demanders of money can come together. And for example, like the Shark Tank as a wonderful example of those two main characters coming together in a market that operates according to the law of supply and demand, pure economics. I have the idea, but I don't have all the money to finance it, which means that I'm going to, after I forecast the inflows and outflows of that idea, I'm going to at some point be communicating with either a bank or an investor. But those are the two traditional ways that we can finance an idea. So a lot of people have the idea but don't have all the money to finance it. Let's say that they go to the bank and they need money. So they have this gap where they maybe put some of their own money in, but they have this gap they have to get up to a larger amount in order to actually launch this idea and try to turn it into reality. Well, that means you're going to get a loan. And that loan, is it going to be free? Absolutely not. There's a price for money, and that price is designated by the interest rate. As a depositor in a savings account, you might just get paid a little bit, but it's basically zero risk. Whereas an entrepreneur, if you're on the other side of this equation now, might go into the bank and you'll be paying interest, but you'll be paying a much higher interest rate because the opportunity is not as safe as putting your money in the bank. It's riskier, so therefore you're willing to pay a higher percentage, but you still have a business model, at least I hope so, that allows you to profit at the end of the day, even though you're making monthly payments on that loan to the bank. There's a price for money, and let's say it's 10%. So now that has to be factored into our equation as we're evaluating ideas that have not even been tried yet. So we already said that any opportunity or idea that we are evaluating, thinking about doing, we should at least be earning what they're paying us at the bank. But furthermore, if we borrow some of the money, we have a price, there's a cost for that, right? And so we now expect to earn a return on that idea, project, business that is at least as much as it costs to borrow the money, right? So, for example, you don't want to borrow money at 10% interest per year and then turn around and invest it into something that will generate 5% return per year. Would you want to do that? Absolutely not. Why? Because the 5% is less than what it costs to even get the money. So now that 10% becomes like a kind of like that some people call it a hurdle rate, but it is essentially like a minimum. It's like a benchmark that you can use, kind of like a ruler you can carry with you every time you're evaluating an opportunity. When you put all these things together, it means that you essentially have you have your own interest rate assumption that you use to evaluate every opportunity. Now, corporations across the world, they do this. They have entire departments that actually sit down and figure out, debate what is that number, because they want to make sure that everything that they're looking at is going to give them money that's above and beyond all, what it costs to get the money, more than what they'd make at the bank, et cetera, et cetera. The real word for it in finance is the weighted average cost of capital, or the WACC. But in the course this month, basically I'm giving you what the interest rate is, and you're going to use that to now evaluate some opportunities or scenarios. Every single opportunity you have in life has an associated and connected series of inflows and outflows. In other words, every opportunity has a pattern of numbers associated with it, but they're all different. And how can you make good economic decisions unless you turn those opportunities into an apples to apples comparison?